Hello, my name is Chef Dylan, and I'm so excited to be joining you today. Today we're going to be cooking a basic pasta dough. Here are the ingredients you will need to cook one serving of pasta. Before we get started, let's make sure we wash our hands. Remember, you're going to count for 20 seconds to make sure we get all the dirt and grime off of our hands. In addition to washing my hands, I have also prepared a clean workspace. I have washed my counter with soap and water, and then additionally I have gone over with a clean water wash, so that way I get all the chemicals off of my counter as well. With today's recipe, we're going to start off with 1 cup of flour. I'm going to demonstrate how I like to measure out my flour. I like to take a big scoop of flour, so like this, and then I'm going to just take a flat edge, so a knife or any other utensil, back of a spoon, and just scrape, and that way I have a nice flat edge. I'm going to then take this and set it aside. Next, I'm going to get 1 egg. I've let this egg sit out just a little bit so it's not super cold. It helps us work with it better. I'm also going to have 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Last thing I'm going to use, but only if I need it, is some cold water. I may not need it, so I'm going to just put that off to the side. So let's get started. So first I'm going to take my 1 cup of flour that we just measured out. I'm just going to set it on my prepared surface. I put down some peel and stick just so it didn't get all over my counter, but if you want, you can use your counter if you have a sealed countertop. I did clean everything, so if it gets over, I'm going to be okay with that. Next, I'm going to take my teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to measure it. Okay, and I'm just going to add that. We're going to mix it in just a minute. So we'll just mix that in. You can use our hands. You can use, I also have a fork if you want to use that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all of this mixture. I'm going to scoop it together. Then I'm going to take my egg. And I want to make sure that my egg can fit inside of this flour. So I'm going to take my egg and I'm just going to push it down. I did wash my egg as well. That way it's not dirty. And I'm just going to keep moving and keep kind of creating this well so that I have plenty of space to work my egg into my flour. All right, so that looks pretty good. So if you can see that, nice space. Now I'm going to go ahead and crack my egg, 1 hand or 2, depending on how daring you are. Sometimes if you're not very good at cracking eggs, you'll want to crack that into your measuring container first. That way you can make sure you don't have any pieces of egg that get in there. And then lastly, I'm going to take my 1 tablespoon of olive oil. Now in class, we did not use olive oil just because it was too challenging to get to the course, but I like to add a little bit of olive oil. It means I have to add less water, and it adds a great flavor to my pasta, and it helps it be really kind of elastic. So now I have flour and salt and my egg and my olive oil all in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to start off kind of by just poking my egg and breaking that yolk. Now I'm going to start mixing it. It's going to spill over the edges, and that's okay. You don't have to chase it. I'm just going to start mixing my eggs, and as I do that, some of this flour is going to get mixed in. Okay? Just keep mixing it in. You can use your fingers if you like to do that. This just keeps a little bit less stickiness on my finger. Okay? And I've had a breach of the walls, so that's okay. I'm just going to keep mixing it. Now, sometimes all of this flour is going to be used, and you'll actually need more flour, but sometimes it's not. It depends on the size of your egg. It depends on the humidity outside. It depends on if your flour is really dry. Sometimes if we make pasta during wet seasons, it requires more flour, but if we make it in the summertime like we are now, it requires less. So I've already gotten a good mixture, right? So it's not moving around anymore. I'm going to clean off my fork, and this is where I'm going to start to use my fingers. And I'm just going to start to squeeze and press. My goal is to just continually take it and push it into itself. So I'm going to scoop it up and kind of fold it over. So I'm going to keep going. And then once it gets kind of together like this, I'm going to put it in my hand. I'm going to try and get some more of those good chunky bits that has the egg in it. I'm going to keep working it. You could also do this on a cutting board. Might be a little easier because your press and seal won't pick up on you. And I can see that my flour is kind of dry. So I can see that I'm going to need a little bit of water to help incorporate the rest of this dough. So you can see right now what I'm doing is I'm just taking my dough and I'm putting it in the palm of my hand, and then I'm going to fold it over. Okay, and then I'm pushing down with the heel of my hand. So I'm going to fold and then push, fold, push. And I'm going to do that for just a moment to see how much of this dough I can get to come together. Collect some more of my dough. You can definitely see it's dry at this point. So I'm going to take some of my water. Now I have 2 tablespoons, right? But I don't want to use all of that at once. That'll just make a big mess. So I'm just going to take, you could just splash it on if you wanted to, but I'm just going to take a couple of teaspoons at a time. And I'm going to now continue to mix that in to my dough. So I'm going to add and then mix very conservatively. Don't add too much because then you will end up with like paste, and we don't want that. Dough is very forgiving though. It's not like if you were making biscuits or something. It's very forgiving. So if it gets too wet, you can just add a little bit more flour. And this is going to take you several minutes. So you're going to get a good arm workout as you move through. I'm going to add a little bit more because I can see most of this has come up. And it'll be like a miracle. Like once you'll be mixing it and it won't be going together, and then all of a sudden it'll all be perfect. So I'm going to take a little bit more. Just add to that driest part right there. Okay. And sometimes you'll need to add a little bit of flour to your hands or a little bit of flour to your board area. Okay, so I've got it almost completely incorporated at this point. As you can see, I've got very little flour left on my board, on my press and seal here. So I'm going to keep moving that around just a little bit until I can get it all in there. And as I start to mix it, I feel that it's less and less dense, less and less thick. Those proteins in the flour are starting to stretch, which is going to help our pasta a lot. I'm just going to keep going around. I want it to be kind of smooth. It's going to take about 4 or 5 minutes of just straight kneading once you get all the flour in there that you want. So you can see right now it's a little bit chunky, right? And it's not super smooth. So I'm just going to continue to blend this until it is more of a smooth dough. I think I want just a smidgen more water. Just a little bit. Fold it and press it. I'm not going to show you the entire process, but it will take you about 4 to 6 minutes to continually mix this to get it to be where you want it. After several minutes of kneading, you'll start to notice that your dough is becoming smoother and you don't have those bumps and lumps within your dough. When you get it to a nice consistency, you're going to go ahead and let it rest for about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to do this inside of a bag so that the outside of the dough does not get hard or dried out. Well, that went by really quick. So we've let our dough rest. The reason we let our dough rest is because flour has something called gluten. You may have heard of some people being gluten allergic. Gluten is a protein that's found in flour. For us in cooking, gluten allows products to be stretchy and bouncy. So if you think about a cake or bread, if you were to lightly press down, it would bounce back. That's because it has elasticity. So what we're waiting is for that protein, gluten, to just kind of relax a little bit in the pasta dough. If we start to roll it out too soon, it's very, very tight, and it won't really let us roll it out. We'll roll it, and it'll come right back together. So we just let it sit for a little while. If it's too hard for you to roll out your dough, you can let it sit for another 4 or 5 minutes. In the meantime, I cleaned up my workspace. I put away all my items that I didn't need anymore. I put my eggs away, I put my salt, my oil, and I took all that old flour and I threw it away because I'm going to start with a nice clean area. Now that I have my clean area, I do want to add a little bit of flour because as I roll this out, it's going to need flour so that it doesn't stick to my counter. So we call this bench flour. I'm just going to put a little bit there. And I'm also going to take my rolling pin and just whatever I had left on my hand. My goal is to make a nice long strip of dough. And I'm going to flip it. I'm going to put a little bit of powder on it, flour on it, and I'm going to keep working it a little bit at a time. Notice I don't really use the handles because, well, I've broken these off before. So I like to use this part, and I like to lean my body forward and really put my body weight into it. If you're not tall enough to get on to your counter, you might want to think about standing on a stepping stool or finding a table or some other place where you can roll out your dough because you are going to need to put your body weight into it. So I'm just going to keep doing this for a couple of minutes, turning it, pushing from the center out, turning it, pushing it from the center out. And I'm going to keep working that dough, stretching it, back and forth, maybe getting a friend or a mom or a dad to help you if it's really tight, and just keep working it. As you can see, my dough is starting to get smoother and thinner as I go. So I'm just going to do this for a few more minutes, and I'll give you an update. Okay, you can see now I've gotten a pretty good length. That's still really, really thick pasta. I don't usually eat pasta that thick, even if it's lasagna. So I'm going to keep rolling, and you'll see it get thinner and thinner. If this is hard for you, you can also cut it in half and just do one section at a time. I know it's hard to believe that one piece of dough has made this much pasta, but we're not done yet. And one of the ways I know if my pasta is done and if it's at the right thickness, so it's still about 1/8 of an inch thick, is you can take a piece of paper with something printed on it. And if you can read or see what's underneath it, I can kind of start to see it. I'm almost there. So I can't see it yet, but I can almost see the lettering. So I'm going to go a little bit more to get it a little bit thinner, and then we should be good to cut. With just a little bit more rolling, you can now see all those words. You can almost read it right through the paper. And I'm pretty happy with that. Let's look how long this piece is. It's so long, it goes off of my counter. So I'm going to start it here and show you how long that piece is. That is going to get you a good amount of pasta. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit of this flour so that we do not have to worry about it sticking. Just a little coating. We don't want to actually taste the flour when we're done. So we're just going to coat it just a little bit. Now, I'm actually going to cut this because I'm actually going to make this into kind of like a spaghetti noodle. And really what I want to do is, you know, I don't mind all these jaggedy edges. If I was at the restaurant, I would go ahead and clean this up. But since I'm just making it for home, I'm gonna just gently put a little bit more flour in between these layers, and I'm gonna just gently fold it up like that. Then I'm gonna cut like this, and I'll show you what that looks like. I have a couple of different tools that I use to cut pasta. One of the easiest ones is just your typical buy it at the Dollar Tree store pizza cutter, and that does a really nice job. I also have something called a bench cutter. Now this is a bench scraper, so it's really great for this, it's great for this. I don't really love to cut pasta with it because what it does is it squishes all the pasta layers together, then they stick. So I like the going like this. You could also use, if you needed to, a knife, but for me, like a butter knife. I'm just going to go ahead and use my lovely pizza cutter. So again, I'm actually going to thin this down a little bit. It's a little bit too long actually. I'm just gonna kind of like this. I don't want to have too thick of pasta to cut because then, like I said, it'll all squish. So what I'm gonna do is just trim off these little bit of edges, okay? And I'm just gonna decide how wide I want my pasta. Do I want it like spaghetti, so it'll be very thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch? Use those measurements. We use math in cooking all the time. So I could do like 1/8 of an inch, okay? Or I could do like fettuccine, so that's more like 1/4 of an inch. Whatever you do, you just want to try and be consistent. You don't need a ruler necessarily, but you just want to determine what it is. Watch your fingers. You're going to go through and cut each piece. Now I'm going to very gently start to fluff my pasta. So I made about fettuccine because I like that thickness for this type of pasta. I'm just going to start very, very gently. I might even add a little bit of flour. I'm going to just start loosening it up. And there you go. That is about one beautiful serving of fettuccine. So I could do a lot of things with this. I could add Alfredo sauce. I could add a pesto sauce, which is just basil and pine nuts. I could add a marinara sauce. Now it's very important to think about when you're going to use your pasta before you start to cook it. If I'm going to use this pasta right now, I can take it and put it into my lightly salted boiling water. Just a few minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. You want to pull it out and break a piece off and look at the inside. It's very thin, so it shouldn't take very long, and it's fresh. If you overcook it, it will just dissolve and you'll have a pan full of hot flour water. So you want to make sure it's not overcooked. It's called al dente, so it's got a little bit of a bite to it. If you want to use it tomorrow or the next day, you can take your bag that you already had your pasta in and take your pasta and just gently place it in your bag and put it in your refrigerator. When you're ready, salt your water, boil, and do the same thing. It'll cook just the same. If you want to store this and you want to keep it for a while, you're going to need to create a way to dry your pasta. There are many ways. Most ways involve hanging your pasta. So you could come up with an elaborate STEM activity, and you could use coat hangers. You could hang it over chopsticks. I like to set up chopsticks, piece of styrofoam, some chopsticks. You could also lay it on a cookie sheet and just turn it every couple of hours. Your goal is that they're individual so that they dry nice and crisp, okay? Once that's done, you can then put them in a large bag and store them away for up to probably 6 months, as long as they stay dry and they don't get damp. Thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your day. Ciao!